But welcome everyone. We're going to get started on cracking the cookie code, digital trackers, and privacy compliance. So I am Jody Daniels, CEO and privacy consultant at Red Clover Advisors, and I am joined by Gary Keibel. Gary, I'd love if you could take a moment to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks very much, Jody, and happy to be on the webinar with everybody. My name is Gary Keibel. I'm a partner at Davis+Gilbert in New York, and I co-lead our privacy and digital media group. And I've been in the game quite a while, so I've seen a lot of things that have happened over the many, many decades.
Wonderful. Well, Gary, we're so excited that you're here with us today to talk about my favorite subject, cookies. So I really do love cookies. What are we going to cover here today? We're going to cover the current landscape, what is happening in the universe of cookies and really pixels. But it's so much more fun to talk about cookies. We're going to do a little bit of an overview of CCPA plus kind of other privacy requirements and what's happening in the privacy law space. We're going to talk about common pitfalls and cookie governance. Now, before we jump in, I have a quick poll that I would love to start. So I have launched my little poll over here, motivation for improving cookie governance. Why are you here? What is your primary motivation for improving cookie governance in your organization? Maybe it's avoiding potential legal litigation, maintaining customer trust and transparency, ensuring regulatory compliance, improving overall data management practices. So I can see a number of you feverishly typing and answering. Pick one. I'm going to end the poll here very quickly so we can get started. We have a lot of wonderful information to get covered. All right. Let's see what everyone has to say. So just under 50% of you really want to make sure that you are in regulatory compliance, and that makes a lot of sense. And then about a quarter really are not fans of legal litigation, would like to prevent that. About 19% just overall good data management practices. Cookies and pixels are just another form of data. And just 10% are focused on the maintaining customer trust and transparency as a primary motivator. I would imagine that everyone here probably cares about everything here, but we only allowed you one primary motivator. So thank you for playing along. We might have a couple more. But first, let's kind of get a little bit of a sense of the lay of the land. So Gary, can you help us understand where are we?
Sure. And unfortunately, people are coming at you from many different directions. And that's why we have these three different parts here on the slide. So privacy laws, we talk about it all the time, about the proliferation of new comprehensive consumer privacy laws on the state level. I keep saying 19, but I think maybe it's increased in the past week or two. But 13 of those states are currently in effect with different laws that are all different from each other. They do not line up perfectly. And the favorite question I get from clients is, Gary, just tell me what the strictest law is and I'll comply with that one. It's got to be California, right? And I say, no, in some ways, California is less strict than other states. They have the most comprehensive law and the most comprehensive enforcement mechanisms, but not the strictest law. So we have those privacy laws to deal with. Now, when you have 19 different states that have passed comprehensive consumer privacy laws, that means you have 19 different enforcers who are out there looking to enforce their state laws. And if you asked a regulator from California or New Jersey or Texas about how they're going to work with the other states in terms of enforcement actions, their response is probably going to be the same. They're going to say, my job is to protect the consumers of my state. And that's a challenge because they're looking at their law and their consumers. They do realize that there are other states out there and other enforcers, but their primary focus is their own law and their own consumers, regardless of the conflicts. So you have lots of different enforcers out there. And the Federal Trade Commission is still enforcing on the federal level, even though we don't have a federal privacy law. And then the third prong there is kind of the toughest one to deal with and the most annoying one to deal with in many cases is the class action lawyers who are bringing claims because they are And forgive me, I have quite a bias, as you might be able to tell. They are weaponizing decades-old privacy laws and applying them against modern technology. And of course, class action lawyers have a very different motivation than regulators. Regulators are there to protect their consumers, and they want corrective action. Class action lawyers are there for the money. And in fact, they don't even want corrective action. They want you to keep doing the wrong thing so they can keep bringing claims. So it's very challenging when you deal with class action litigation versus regulatory enforcement. But the painful fact is you're getting hit by multiple sides.
And Gary, on the enforcement side, I know I've heard at many an IAPP event, for example, multiple regulators on a panel all admitting that they're also talking to each other.
Yes, they are certainly talking to each other. And I mean, we've seen this in the data broker registration world, where you register in California and now you get emails from Oregon and Texas saying, hey, why didn't you register here? But they do speak to each other. There have not been multi-state AG investigations under the new state privacy laws. In other areas of marketing and advertising law, there are many, many multi-state actions where they coordinate together. We haven't seen that as much in the privacy space because their laws differ, but we might see that in the future.
Right. Or if you have an enforcement action like we're going to talk about over here, if I was a regulator in another state, I might say, that's interesting. Thanks.
Yes.
Fill in the blank state, in our case, California. So Gary, you just talked about enforcement actions, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the recent one, and for sure have you, share your thoughts as well. So there's a lot of information on this page. We've kind of summarized what happened with the Honda enforcement. It's actually just over a month old. It was really one of the more recent non-data broker enforcements under the new CPPA, but really the second big CCPA enforcement action kind of like this. So when we boil all this text down, Honda really struggled in 4 areas. One was going to be its opt-out mechanism. It made it really challenging. It didn't have global privacy control signals there properly. It didn't have the opt-out links in the right places. Their privacy rights process also required too many fields. So it had about 8 different fields. And for example, opt-out requests, the regulator really said, actually you only need 2. So it was saying 8 and it really only had 2. It did not have contracts in place with over 100 different vendors. And this is really common. I know we're going to talk about one of the ways that we might be able to solve for this, but it's really common, especially in the advertising space. There's so many different pixels coming in and out that companies are missing the contract part of understanding who is this other provider. And then they also didn't have training in place for privacy rights. So one of the big requirements under CCPA is that the team, the people, the parts responsible for privacy rights, you train them. And that group in particular, and that training, they could not provide evidence on that training. Gary, I'm really curious, what stands out for you on the Honda enforcement action?
Sure, and we see a lot of disconnects a lot of times with clients where their privacy policy says one thing, their link for someone to access their data subject access rights says something different, and then there's pixels all over the site that might imply even something else different is going on. And having a consistent message is really, really important. And quite frankly, that's the first thing the regulators are going to see. The first thing they're going to see is the opt-out links on your website and what the privacy policy says. Going behind the curtain and seeing things such as contracts with vendors and training and things of that nature, that will happen if the regulatory action commences. But you really got to make sure that at least, the front door looks good before someone walks into the house. And fortunately, your camera cannot pan down right now because I have 2 current enforcement actions on my desk because it's there's a press release from the AG's office in California that they've started a sweep in the ad tech industry focused mostly on sensitive personal information. And I have a couple of clients that have gotten letters from the AG's office. And it starts that way. They look and see what's going on the site. They see that things don't line up properly, and then they start to peel away at the onion, and it starts to smell as they go deeper and deeper. So there are so many different parts of the privacy compliance program, but let's start with the very basic. When you go to your site and it says what you do in the privacy policy and the options that are available for consumers, do those line up? Are they consistent, and do they make sense?
Those are great starts. So we're going to talk about all these different components in a moment, but before we do, let's come back to your favorite friends. I know how much you really are enjoying this pixel litigation. Talk to us a little bit about what is this? Where are we in CIPA? What are some recent cases?
Yeah, with CIPA, the California Invasion of Privacy Act, I mean, this is not fun. So this is a law passed back in, I think it was like the late 60s, and really intended to make it illegal for someone to intercept a telephone call. So, for those of us who are nice and old like I am, and you pick up the phone and you would dial and you hold it to your ear. I'm trying to explain this for those in their 20s who don't understand how phone calls used to be made. That's what you would do. And if someone would intercept that, then that would violate the law. There were two parts of this. There were wiretapping claims, which dealt with interception of a communication between two parties and interception by a third party. And then there was what's called these pen registry or trap and trace devices, which was back then in the 60s, the installation of a physical device to intercept the communication and possibly record it. And that latter part, the pen registry and trap and trace, can only be done with a warrant and a court order. There's no way to do that with consent. Whereas the wiretapping claims, you could defeat that with consent. So what's happening today is the class action lawyers jumped onto this and said, I wonder if pixels in the background collecting data on the website could be considered wiretapping. And they found some receptive courts in California that also said, I guess that could be an interception of a communication between two parties without consent. And further, it could be a pen registry or a trap and trace device to install that on a website. And so class action lawyers have jumped on this. They are sending out letters nonstop to websites and online services saying you're violating CIPA, and CIPA allows for significant damages. But of course, the class action lawyers are happy to settle for a nominal sum. And it's the unfortunate reality that would you rather pay a $5, $10, $15, $20,000 settlement to make this go away? Or would you rather litigate for $50, $100, $200,000 or more to prove that you're right? And because courts have been receptive to some degree in California to these claims, that has emboldened the class action lawyers. Now, there have been other decisions over the past few months and year in California that have been helpful to the defendants. So there's a mix of cases out there. But again, it's the painful reality that the class action lawyers know that it is far, far cheaper for you to settle and move on with your life than to litigate to prove that they are wrong. So as Jody's shown on the next slide here, there are some cases that have been helpful. There have been a few cases that have been dismissed for a lack of standing. So when the class action lawyers come to you and either write a letter or file a case, they should have a representative plaintiff for the class. And many times this representative plaintiff, really had no intention of doing business with you. They're what we call a tester. They really went to the website to see if there were shortcomings and then use that as the basis for the claim. There have been some courts that have said this tester has really not suffered any injury. In fact, not only did they not suffer a privacy injury, they were looking for a privacy violation. So how could they suffer a privacy injury if they were actually looking for a privacy problem? They were asking to be injured. And so some courses have dismissed for a lack of standing. There are these wiretapping laws in other states as well. There are these laws in probably all 50 states, and class action lawyers have tested in some other states. A Washington state appellate court was very skeptical that pixels can be used to intercept communications. They sort of laughed it off. That happened in a Massachusetts court as well. But it's the California case that have been a little receptive to this. Some have been dismissed because of the knowledge of the third-party interception. The Pennsylvania court had dismissed one because the privacy policy was linked on every page. And if you're going to make the argument that a communication was being intercepted without consent, well, there could be cookie banners that we'll talk about in a moment, but also because the privacy policy is there and says we use third parties and they're going to be collecting data off the website. And then the last point kind of ties into the first point, that a tester may have no expectation of privacy, so they may have no standing. But the reality is there's inconsistency out there from state to state, and there's inconsistency within California itself. So it depends which court you end up in front of, and the class action lawyers learn which courts and which districts are more receptive to their cases, and they tend to file the claims in those receptive districts and states.
So that was fun. Litigation's always lovely. Let's move now back to our cookies and our opt-outs. And, maybe I've given you consent, but I don't actually like it anymore. Gary, can you walk us through, there's a plethora of existing states right here. And as we can see, not exactly all perfectly lined up.
Exactly. So, when we talk about disconnects between the states, we could go on for hours and hours and hours. But we're talking about, 1 hour here, and we're talking about one issue about sort of, the cookies. So most states in their new comprehensive privacy laws talk about the obligation of a business or a controller to honor opt-out preference signals that are sent automatically by browsers and treat that as an opt-out request to opt out of selling or sharing or targeted advertising. Again, all the states define it a little bit differently. Some of them are giving you a period of time to get on board. For instance, Oregon, it doesn't kick in until next year. They're giving you time to get ready. But these signals are signals that are sent by browsers. It may be turned on by default. It may be turned on by the user, but you need to have a system in place to receive these signals and then honor them as if the consumer had clicked your opt-out link on your website asking to opt out of targeted advertising. Let's hop to the next slide where we dig a little deeper into the opt-out preference signal. So what does it mean? California defines it as a signal that's sent by a platform, technology, or mechanism on behalf of the consumer that communicates the consumer choice to opt out of the sale and sharing of personal information. And it talks about it in a format that's commonly used by businesses. And so there could be a debate about what is an opt-out preference signal. California did not say that specifically the GPC, the Global Privacy Control, which is a common signal, is a signal that meets the definition. Colorado did. Colorado did go through a process of identifying what signals out there would meet our definition of a universal opt-out mechanism. And you see that they borrow some words from a GDPR that it clearly communicates a consumer's freely given, unambiguous choice to opt out. So I would say to those listening on the webinar right now that GPC signals, you absolutely should start recognizing them. If you work with any consent management platform, they likely have the ability to recognize those GPC signals and treat them as an opt-out request. But if you want to go state by state, you can do that. But my suggestion always is to take a more national approach, because doing the state by state approach is going to be hard and you might make mistakes.
And I would just add, when you add that GPC and kind of turn it on, make sure you test it. We have come across some companies who they had it on, but it wasn't quite working properly. So always make sure you're testing. And then, as everyone here, if you're curious, what does this look like to the consumer? And you also believe in global privacy control, you as a consumer can go to global privacy control, download the extension and turn it on yourself. And you will be able to see the experience that you have when you cross different websites, because it does show up depending on the tool that you're using. Sometimes people are customizing the banner as well. So I encourage you to test it out yourself if you want to. All right, Gary, you're going to walk us through now a little bit of sensitive personal information.
Okay, this is important for two reasons. Again, more disconnects between the states, and this is a heavy area of focus for regulators. I talked about the current California Attorney General sweep. It's really focused on sensitive personal information. And before I talk about some of the disconnects here, I'll talk about the biggest disconnect. Remember, I said earlier that California is not the strictest privacy law in the United States? Look at the bottom left of that chart there. California is an opt-out state for processing sensitive personal information. Nearly every other state is an opt-in state. Of the 19 states that have passed comprehensive consumer privacy laws, I'd say 16 or 17 are opt-in states. You must get consent from the consumer to process their sensitive personal information. But California is an opt-out state, so that makes things a little bit easier. What is sensitive personal information? Well, there are commonalities between the definitions, and then there's a few differences. Racial, ethnic, religious, sexual orientation, biometrics, health information, those are usually common. Children, which is a whole nother area of disconnects about what is the age in which someone is considered a child. And precise geolocation is a sensitive area. And the definition of what is precise geolocation differs. Some states say it's under 1,850 feet. Others say it's under 1,750 feet. So there are disconnects there. But I think as you're looking at your compliance program, firstly, if you can stay away from sensitive personal information, do it. Because that's what regulators both on the state and the federal level have been very, very focused on. If you cannot stay away from sensitive personal information, then you need to focus on whether you need opt-in consent or opt-out consent and what additional rights and disclosures you need to give to consumers about that SPI, as we call it.
Awesome. Well, Gary, thank you so much. And of course, there's more states. So if we were to line up more states, you have a pretty similar situation in having to understand which state your people are in and what it all looks like. We've talked about a number of the different requirements, and just to kind of wrap them together, we have cookie banners. And coming up in just a few moments, we're going to talk a little bit more about, should we have a cookie banner? Should we not have a cookie banner? And we talked a lot about global privacy control, the ability to opt out of do not sell. And honestly, I probably should have do not sell or share to make sure I totally am meeting California's very unique language requirements. And you can also use the Your Privacy Choices logo that you can download from the California Attorney General's website. So making sure that you have the ability to honor GPC signals, making sure that you're able to really opt out of that targeted advertising. And if you're using advertising, some of the analytics pixels, some of the ad tech pixels, that might really be qualified as your sale or share of personal information. You want to make sure you have the right link easily found in the footer of your website, and also that it's working. I gave you a hint, test for GPC, test the do not sell, make sure it's also working. And Gary, you talked so much about the disclosures. That's so important about having the privacy notice. And I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about when you feel, should everyone have a cookie policy separate from a privacy notice? Is a cookie policy in a privacy notice? I know there's different approaches that companies have taken. And if you want to maybe offer a little bit of thought in your opinion.
Yeah, so if you're dealing in the EU, I would say yes, you need to have a separate cookie policy. For the US, I don't think you necessarily need to have a separate cookie policy. The primary focus is, are you making it clear to consumers what data is being collected on your site and for what purpose? You don't have to identify by name in the privacy policy all those parties, but you need to explain what's happening and who's doing it. Now, when we start talking about the cookie banner, you will want to have granular choices there where people can turn things on and off. But as far as having a separate cookie policy in the US, that can be a very nice approach, and that can help clarify things for your consumers. But you can certainly clarify it within the privacy policy itself through appropriate language about what's happening on the site and really what are those purposes. And to protect yourself against those CIPA claims and lawsuits, that's going to be a big area with cookie banners that we'll talk about. But it's really key that you talk in the privacy policy and everywhere that there are third parties involved here, and that the consumer has some ability to control what's happening on the site with those third parties.
And contracts are a really big piece. I alluded to one of the challenges under the recent enforcement was that there were not over 100 different contracts. And when we are placing, or maybe an agency is placing all these different pixels, it's really important to understand who is this company and what is actually happening behind the scenes. So Gary, this segues beautifully into the IAB, I don't know how we say MISPA.
Yeah, we just say MSPA because
there you go.
too many consonants in a row there.
Us
So
trying to be cool and clever.
Many of you may know about this, but forgive me for doing a little bit 101 here. So the IAB is the Interactive Advertising Bureau, a very influential trade association in the digital media landscape, and they come out with guidance and best practices quite often. So one of the challenges in the ad tech ecosystem, and Jody mentioned that you need to have contracts with all the parties involved in the data collection on your website. What happens in the ad tech ecosystem is you may have a provider that suggests to put a pixel on your website, but that pixel may be bundled with other pixels, and they may be passing data down the chain to other providers. Well, you don't have a contract with all those providers. And according to the CCPA, you do need to have a contract with all those parties who are getting the data. So the MSPA does a couple of things. It puts everyone into contractual privity with one another, because everybody who signs the MSPA is now a third-party beneficiary of the other signatories. So now you've satisfied the requirement that you have a contract with all these parties that are collecting data off of your site. Second challenge, if there's an opt-out or a deletion request, how do you pass that down to the other parties on your site to tell them to stop collecting data in the capacity of a third party or to be used for sale, share, or targeted advertising? How do you stop that from happening? Well, you can't pick up the phone and just call the pixel providers and say, hey, Meta, someone clicked opt out. Can you just stop, using their data for targeted advertising purposes? Doesn't work. It's all through automatic signaling. And so the MSPA is a contract which talks about how the IAB's signaling procedure, called the GPP, is going to be passed down to the other ad tech providers. So then if you sign the MSPA, you've satisfied your contractual privity requirement, and if you implement what the MSPA says, then you have a signaling mechanism that can send the opt-out request downstream to other ad tech providers, so that when someone says, I want to opt out of targeted advertising, those pixel providers on your website will stop acting as a third party and will start acting as your service provider. It's very complex, and to prove it, Jody's going to go to the next slide, which shows you how complex this system is. The contract itself, and I actually usually have it sitting on my desk kind of nearby. Let's see, what's the latest page count on the contract? 57 pages. So it's a long contract, and then to implement it, you need the technical implementation, which, as you can see from this one slide, is a little complex. Now, this is a reason why you might want to work with a consent management platform, a CMP provider who has a cookie banner and program, because they may be able to read the signals coming from the IAB and pass them down the stream for you. The contract you'll have to sign yourself, but the signaling can be done by a vendor. Now, this is a self-regulatory program, and regulators have not said the program is bad, but they haven't officially said it is perfectly acceptable. But because they have not said that there's things wrong with the program, the implication is that the regulators see good things in this program, and it can help you do things that you cannot do on your own. So I'm a big proponent of the IAB. I think the MSPA program is, sort of the only game in town if you want to do something like this. So it makes sense to look into it and speak to your CMP provider and see if they can help you.
Well, Gary, thank you for distilling 57 pages into a really digestible format. In just a moment, we're going to move to a little bit of some of the common pitfalls, but you mentioned cookie consent software. So I thought it would be helpful to do another little poll. So how often do you check the cookie consent software to see if it's working properly? Because we just described this very complex scenario, and we've talked about GPC. So how often are you doing this? Monthly, quarterly, twice a year, or not happening for you? I'll let a few more people answer. And we're going to end the poll. So sharing the results, we're almost an even split. So the majority is kind of quarterly, followed by a little bit of monthly. And there's just under a quarter of you who might want to join your monthly, quarterly, or twice a year friends. So I'll even give you once a year, at least sometime. Check what it is that you have. It is tech, and it does not always work properly. So moving right along, let's talk a little bit about cookie banners. Oh my goodness, should we have cookie banners? Should we not have cookie banners? And, Jody's in Georgia. Jody has no privacy rights. What do you do about Jody in Georgia?
Sure. So cookie banners, let's go back a number of years, going back to when GDPR came on the scene, May 25th, 2018. I hope you all remember, it's a great holiday that we celebrate every year. So when GDPR came out, we all said we really need cookie banners here because you cannot process personal information of an individual located in the EU without having a legal basis. And the best legal basis to get is consent, as opposed to relying on other legal bases. So cookie banners became common in the EU. The advice back then was that they're not needed in the US. There's no law that says you have to have a cookie banner in the US. Along come our, and I say this sarcastically, our friendly class action attorneys who are bringing these wiretapping claims and saying you're intercepting people's communications without consent. So how can you possibly get consent? Cookie banner. So these days, we definitely recommend that you use a cookie banner if you have third-party pixels on your website, not because it's a legal requirement under any of the state laws, but because it can possibly protect you against claims coming from class action attorneys. When I say it's not required by law, not only is it not required by law, in the CCPA regulations, they actually throw some shade on cookie banners by saying that if you put the DSARS options into the cookie banner, that's not sufficient to meet your obligations because a cookie banner goes away once someone clicks accept, reject, or whatnot. So the advice is to have the cookie banner, but much like Jody was saying a minute ago about your CMP, make sure it works properly because a poorly functioning cookie banner can be worse on the regulatory side than no cookie banner at all. Then on the class action side, of course, you do want it to work as well. But there have been regulators that look at cookie banners and say the disclosures are deceptive. They are not saying the correct thing. It came up in the Honda case. So the advice is to do it, but do it right.
So let's talk a little bit about what kinds of cookies we have and then doing it right. A lot of times we have different categories of cookies. These are just examples. We have strictly necessary. Sometimes people call those essential, but these are the ones that literally the website needs to make the website function. Strictly necessary is not because you really think as a company, you really have to have it just because it would be nice to have. It is truly to make the website function. Performance cookies, they're also sometimes called analytics cookies. These are your Google Analytics. Sometimes it's Shopify, Hotjar, Adobe Analytics. You can kind of pick your flavor. Now on the analytics cookies, just something to really be mindful of, not all analytics cookies are the same. And some of those are sharing data back and might be deemed a sale of data, and some of them are not. You really have to look at what it is that is actually happening. And some of them might even be keystroking. So also that's a whole nother ballgame. And I've sometimes seen people kind of pull out some of the keystroking and kind of session replay cookies and even call them out separately. Then we have sometimes people classify as functional. Video player cookies might be there. The most common is targeting or advertising. Also, people use kind of the words a little bit interchangeably. These should really match what you have in your privacy notice. So as Gary was talking about before, make sure your notice matches what you're doing. The category cookies in your consent manager and software should also match what's actually happening. These are going to be the most common. Pick your social media pixel, Google ad, anything to make me buy more stuff on your site. And then of course we have social media pixels, which are different pixels potentially than just the targeted social media advertising pixel. I could have a pixel that's just capturing likes or my connect button. Those are kind of other social media pixels as well. So Gary talked about our cookie banners, and one of the biggest challenges that we see wrong all the time are dark patterns. In fact, I went to a website and it happened to be in German. I can't speak German, but I could tell the dark pattern of the cookie banner because the far right was blue and highlighted compared to my other choices. I knew exactly what it is that they were trying to do in a completely different language that I can't even speak. So dark patterns are not just in cookie banners, they could be anywhere. It might show up in the choice when you have the cookie consent software come up, and I might have confirmed my choices. Well, the Honda case reminded us that we really also want a reject button next to it. One click opt-in, one click opt-out. Symmetry in choice. We also don't want big fonts. We don't want big bright colors. We don't want big boxes. A dark pattern is anywhere where you're trying to encourage the person to pick what is best for the company, not what is necessarily best for me, the person. In a retail environment, anyone ever bought anything and it's pre-ticked with the, you're sure you don't want the insurance and the add $5 to this? The new one I've seen is in shopping. It's adding like insurance automatically to my shipment to make sure it's showing up. It's all pre-checked, really small, tiny text that you can barely see. These are all things that are dark patterns. And when it comes to cookies and banners, no dark patterns. Equal symmetry and choice. If you leave today, one click opt-in, one click opt-out, and then remember everything Gary said. Gary, anything you want to add on dark patterns?
Yeah,
I'm very passionate about our dark patterns over here and making people get them right.
Yeah, and dark patterns are defined in a number of new privacy laws. Again, some of the definitions differ state to state, but the concepts are very similar. The CCPA regulations talk about symmetry and choice. Even before that, I was always saying to clients, look, as easy as it is for a consumer to get in, you want to make it just as easy for them to get out. And so it's that issue. And then there's lots of other little things in dark patterns, like don't shame people into taking a particular action. I always laugh, when I book airline tickets. And then as you're about to confirm the airline ticket, it says basically two choices. Do you want to pay a couple of extra dollars for insurance for this travel? Or do you want to risk losing all your money and your family hating you because you wasted all these money on airline tickets? It's like they're trying to shame you into paying for something extra. So there are lots of issues in dark patterns, but for privacy purposes, yes, that symmetry and choice is far and away the most important.
Yeah, and we even have a state like New York, which doesn't have a comprehensive privacy law, issuing guidance on dark patterns. People really care about dark patterns. What are a couple other kind of cookie banner do's and don'ts? So clear explanation of the types of cookies. It's not okay to have a banner that says we use cookies. Those banners are not good banners. Please don't use those banners. What are the kinds of cookies? We just talked about the classifying the cookies. So understand the kind of cookies that you have and be able to explain we're using for advertising. We have analytics, we're customizing content. Like explain what's actually happening, making sure you have an ability for the user to actually see the kind of cookies and the categories. This is where your consent solution is going to really be helpful. Don't forget about the mobile experience. I have experienced so many times, there might be a few too many screenshots on my phone where the whole thing, I can't even click, I can't click anything because and then you can't even move the mobile experience. You don't forget your user experience and consumer experience, because if as a user, I'm having a bad experience on your mobile site because of privacy, that reflects your brand. And your marketing team is trying to connect with people. We want them to buy and explore. We don't want privacy to be the inhibitor. We want to make sure that we're complying, we're doing all the right things, but don't forget that the user experience is so critically important. Explain what are the different options that you have. Make it easy to change. Gary was just describing, right? If it's easy to opt in, make it easy to opt out. And we want to make sure that we're not using our dark patterns. Also, while I describe mobile, don't block the whole homepage. I've seen cookie banners block even the privacy notice. Well, if I want to read the privacy notice, well, I can't even get to the footer of the website. And then we don't want people to, in my opinion, we really don't want to force someone to accept. I should be able to engage in how I choose to have cookies, because otherwise that is not accepting. That is not consent, where I'm forced to close the box and poof, they're here. That's not fully, freely given consent as defined by any privacy law. And then there's differing opinions on how long you should have that consent for. A year is what we often hear about. Sometimes people do it way sooner, and I would encourage sooner, but every single time I show up at the website, probably not ideal either. And if anyone is interested, my younger daughter really loves showing me cookie banners. Every time she goes to a website, Mom, there's a cookie banner here. Oh, look, I got you screenshots at school of One Trust cookie banner. So everyone is actually paying attention to cookie banners these days, even the young ones. Gary, anything you'd like to add here? Oh, you are on mute though. We cannot hear.
Oh, sorry. My dog was barking in the background. She wanted to participate in the webinar. I said, no, you cannot participate.
She had strong views.
Exactly. So, yes, if you want to find bad examples of cookie banners, that's a piece of cake. So, hey, cake, cookies. So you need to really focus on making them easy to use and make it clear to the consumer. Again, put yourself in the shoes of like your mom. If your mom came across this cookie banner, would you understand what the choices are, as opposed to pushing them into one way or the other? And again, going back to what Jody said earlier, test, 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 make sure it works.
Yeah. So one of the things on testing might also be a little bit on scanning. So a lot of times people are trying to scan and find all their cookies and they missed a part. So these are just kind of a couple tips. This is like a really detailed slide. I want you to just appreciate, one, make sure you're looking at the root domain, not only subdomains. This is an area where people kind of forget. And then, you might have the cookies aggregated over time and people are clearing cookies. So making sure that you have the scanning capabilities correct. And sometimes the people who are best at scanning aren't necessarily the right people to categorize all of the cookies. So make sure you have the right people on your cookie team to ensure you have the scanning piece all set up. Now, I gave a hint at this earlier, but here's my beautiful screenshot of just a plain cookie experience where it has the reject button. So sometimes there's two allows, but the piece I really wanted you to focus on is the reject all on the bottom. I can easily reject them all, and I can easily confirm them all or allow them all. And a lot of times, this reject here with this screenshot is within, I've clicked, I want to manage settings. That's where this shows up. A lot of times that is missing. We want to make sure symmetry and choice, and it shows up not just on the banner, but also over here in the consent settings.
Yeah, I'll add one thing there, Jody. A lot of the vendors, and there are fantastic, great vendors out there, but they are not going to guarantee your compliance with the law. And if you look at the contract with the vendor, they're saying compliance with the law is your obligation, because they're giving you tools to structure it in the way you want. So they will allow you to build a button that says, accept all, reject all, but they may allow you to put words on there saying, yes, I want cookies, no, I don't care about anything in my life. I mean, you could customize it any way you want, and they're not going to be responsible if your customization does not comply with applicable law. So when you hire a vendor, you license some product to do this for you, don't then sit back in your easy chair and think, I'm done. Really, the way that it's implemented makes a huge difference.
I'm so glad you said that, Gary. It's really true. We see a lot of times they've just taken the default, and the default might not even match where their people are. And there's a lot of settings in all of these different tools. It's very important that you really go through or go through with a professional of, okay, what are the right settings for your scenario and your goals and your company? And it's lovely to go and look at examples on the internet, but they might have a different setup and goals than you might. Everyone's risk tolerance is different. The areas are different. So really focus on what's important for you and look at all of those different settings within the tool, because they might be default and it might not work for you. We have talked about testing. Hopefully you leave here today appreciating testing is important. So those of you who are the 21% who voted never, I hope we have encouraged you. So if we were to have this test again, you would vote differently. It's important to make sure that the cookie banner is working. If I hit the reject button, are the cookies actually going to not fire? Are they really rejected? We see this not actually happening. And this often happens where there's a multi-jurisdictional setup. So sometimes you want one region as one way and one region as the other way, and sometimes they get flip-flopped. We actually recently did an audit and the entire banner was flip-flopped. So testing is really important. Test often, test after deployment. Are you going to set up global privacy control? Make sure the do not sell link works. Did you do a website upgrade? Did you have new widgets on your page? Did you put new pixels on the page? There's so many different places for when you should be testing, because the website's typically dynamic, right? They change. We're putting new pixels, we're doing something new, and it's tech. I don't know about you, but technology is not perfect and things happen. And so you want to make sure that you're able to catch those things happening before a regulator does or before a consumer does and then complains. So like I said, opt out means reject, making sure our cookie banner's in place, and then you kind of just can't test enough. So test again. Now, who should be part of the cookie team? We really think you should invite Gary and I to be part of your cookie team. And internally, who are your privacy and legal team members? Marketing, for sure, they're the ones most likely responsible in some way of saying, I want this pixel on the site. But sometimes the web development teams actually own the placement, but I've also seen the placement owned by IT teams. And then who owns the cookie consent tool? That could be someone totally different. And we also have agencies, third parties who have access to container tags on your site, placing pixels all day long. And I've had conversations, and then sometimes people are surprised that agencies have access. Agencies 100% have access to many different companies' websites. And you're going to want to think about, well, do I want them to have open access? Do I want control on that? What does the agency do as part of our cookie team here? And how does all of this work together? So Gary, do you have anything about maybe a team member that you want to call out, or anything to add for people appreciating just the complexity of who's a part of this process?
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at your organization, because in a very large organization, then you have, these different departments, and they may not be as motivated as perhaps privacy and compliance, excuse me, is to take care of this. If it's in a smaller organization, people are wearing multiple hats and may not have time. They feel that they're so busy and they can't do all these different things. But you really need to address it from these functional areas of legal and IT and marketing and development. And again, it may be one person doing multiple roles, but you got to make sure all those functions are taken care of.
Yeah, absolutely. And the larger the team and the larger the company, the process is going to be really important to be able to manage all these things. So if we were to kind of think about a roadmap and then governance, so we talked a lot about laws. Gary highlighted, we got 19 laws in the US, we have GDPR. You might be in other countries, and there's no shortage of privacy laws, over 150 globally. Pick your favorite one. We really want to make sure you understand, how is your current cookie set up? What is the consent software that you have? And is it set up to the laws, to the regions, to the type of data that you're collecting? We hopefully have drilled in an audit testing. It's really, really important. Aligning to the privacy notice and the cookie notice, training your team. So let's think about the agency and what do they need to know, or all those other team members that we just talked about. Do they know what their role is and what it is that they need to be doing? And we're not done. We might have a new law passed next week. So how does that intersect with everything that we've just described here? So Gary, I'd love, how are you seeing clients kind of effectively creating their cookie programs and roadmaps?
Yeah, there's such a wide difference in terms of how companies address this. Those that have a privacy officer usually do it the best, because there's somebody who's really in control of the process. When you have organizations, again, maybe smaller ones, where there's not a chief privacy officer or a chief privacy counsel, then it's sort of falling on, well, who's taking responsibility for this? And that's really one of the biggest concerns. So I think it's important really to have leadership at the top, someone who has this roadmap on their own roadmap of things to do and will stay on top of it. And when you have an organization where there is no top level control or responsibility, that's where things tend to fall apart.
Yeah. So speaking of, falling apart, I kind of look at this like a house. You have to have a really strong foundation. You need people, that's our team. You need process, because you need to know who's doing what, and how will you handle the requirements in a particular region? How will you handle, I keep picking on myself, but Jody in Georgia has no right. So what do you do about people like me, right? You need a process. What is your process for placing a new pixel? And what is the technology that you're going to use to help you manage this? This is an area where I highly recommend finding your favorite provider out there to help you with that cookie consent solution. I have seen companies try and build it themselves, and it's just an ever-changing space. The rules and requirements continue to change, and that is what all the different providers are doing. That is their job, is to build the software to help you manage all these things. So think about, as we're leaving here today, who's your team? Did we share a member of your cookie team that you don't have today? Maybe think about who that's going to be. Have you documented the people and the process and what your rules are for implementing something new and how you'll respond, or what your requirements are for a cookie banner or no cookie banner? You know, the rules of the road for your company. Have you documented all of that? What is your cadence going to be for how you'll present a banner, how you'll test, how you'll manage categorizing all the different cookies? Training the team members. What does training look like? How often will you train them? And what does auditing the program look like? How often will you test, and who will perform that? So this is really, as we think of it, a house, an ability, a framework to be able to manage cookies, pixels, digital trackers, all of it. And the idea of this cookie governance is very similar. It's a subset, just like you're going to do your data inventory, like you're going to update your privacy notice, how you're going to manage privacy rights. But cookie governance is an essential piece. And with all the pixel litigation, we're seeing more companies really realizing we need a documented plan. We might have locked down who was placing the pixel, but I didn't have a plan for the banner or categorizing or how we handle litigation versus obligations. So Gary, I was hoping you might be able to wrap us up here.
Sure. So, I mean, we've gone through a lot of compliance things, and we keep saying test and review because things are changing nonstop. I mean, this is really, you got to take a wash and rinse, repeat approach to this, because new laws are coming out, new regulatory guidance is coming out. If you put in place the greatest privacy compliance program ever known to mankind today on April 15th, you got to revisit it in a couple of months because it's not once and done. And you have to have that mindset, and there have to be people in the organization that are willing to go back and review. Obviously, you should review if there are new laws that are passed. Obviously, you should review if your practices change. But at a bare minimum, you should have some cadence of doing a review of these controls after you've put them in place to make sure that you're staying up to date. And there may be a need to change, as I said, because there are new laws, there's new regulatory guidance, your data processing activities have changed, or there's been enforcement actions out there that have given us guidance of things that regulators are looking for. So not a one and done. The negative is that this takes a lot of work. The positive is that it keeps, Jody and I employed, forever.
Indeed. So we at Red Clover have a variety of different resources we encourage you to grab. And I also encourage you to follow Gary. He is speaking all the time. He also has a number of articles and presentations and awesome alerts. So if you are not already signed up, I highly encourage you to do so. So Gary, we're so excited that you joined us today. I'm going to leave this up here while we have a couple questions. So one of the easy questions is people are asking about slides and recording. So this webinar is being recorded, and so we will be sharing the recording after the call, or after the webinar rather. One of the questions has to do with large companies and small companies. So are enforcers really only focused on the large public companies? What about private companies and smaller companies? Gary, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll jump on that one. So I mentioned dealing with some enforcement actions. I'm dealing with some current enforcement actions right now. I dealt with some enforcement actions during the data broker sweep that the CPPA went through at the end of last year. And in both situations, I have clients that are large and clients that are tiny. So, but they're processing a lot of data, especially in the data broker space. So it's not that they're ignoring the small guys. They're really focused on who is processing consumer data. And are you processing enough consumer data? There's a privacy concern, and they don't care if you're a 10,000 person organization or a 10-person organization. It's about the fact that you are processing consumer data and you're not doing it appropriately. You can be a target for enforcement.
And similar vein, there's a question around B2B websites. So is there any difference in cooking and tracking consent for B2B websites? And I'll take that first part, which is no, it's just a matter of which state or which region you have to comply with. But let's take CCPA, B2B is included in California. So the California CCPA requirements are going to be the same, regardless of where you are. And the same is going to be true from a GDPR perspective, as well as other regions around the world. There's a part two to this question, Gary, and I'd love for you to share on the B2B part. And also, if you're open, web tracking or web beacons and email tracking. Do you have any thoughts about how companies should handle from a best practice perspective? Because we don't traditionally have cookie consent in emails.
Right, exactly. For emails, I mean, certainly I've seen a lot of companies in their privacy policy disclose that the emails will have tracking and then have a hyperlink to the privacy policy in the email itself. Of course, you can't get consent when the email opens right away. So that's not possible. But talking about the B2B issue, you're correct to highlight California, but it's also been the painful reality that a lot of these class action lawyers are reaching out to B2B websites with their alleged representative plaintiff saying that they represent a class of consumers for these privacy violations. And when you dig, you say, well, we're a B2B service, and anyone who comes to our website and wants to engage our services is in a unique, specific industry. Who is your representative plaintiff, and what is their interest in doing business with us? I talked about testers, because a lot of them are not real potential customers. They are just testing your website. And there have been some courts, as I mentioned, that do not like that. They do not like that you send a tester to a B2B website who has absolutely no legitimate interest in doing business with that website, but is just trying to find a privacy violation. But in terms of compliance, yes, B2B websites can still be targets here.
Yeah. Gary, curious if you have some thoughts. I know we've talked about before, Google Consent Advance Mode, where tags still fire on reject but are sent anonymously.
Yeah, the word anonymous always, makes, my hair stand up in the back of my neck. It's like, all right, so what do we mean by anonymous? If we look at CCPA, it talks about de-identified information, not necessarily anonymous. Some states will talk about pseudonymized information. But what does it mean to be anonymous? And that's really the key there, is to find out, has the information been de-identified in a manner so that it no longer meets the definition of personal information or personal data under the applicable laws. If it does, then we're out of these laws, because these laws deal with personal data and personal information. And if you've managed to get yourself out of that definition, you've managed to get yourself out of those laws.
So we've talked about this a little bit, but maybe we can talk about it again. So there are states that do not require consent, and the question is basically, like, we can collect the data based on geolocation rules. I know we always get the question, should I set it up by geolocation? Should I set it up nationally? So maybe, Gary, you can share just kind of what you're seeing. I will say we're seeing, for a select few, they're picking by geo, and the majority is they're just treating everybody the same. That's our experience that we're moving more towards in the US. I'm curious, what are you seeing from a client point of view?
Yeah, I agree. I'm seeing most parties go with a national approach for their disclosures and consent mechanisms, but there are some that will do a state-by-state or regional approach because there's a very legitimate reason. Maybe they are a data broker and they really don't want to lose people in states that they don't have to. So they need to offer the opt-out rights to the user in Texas, but the user in Oklahoma is saying, tough, we're not going to give you the right to opt out. So it kind of depends on the business model. Of course, you need resources if you're going to do a state-by-state and jurisdiction-by-jurisdiction approach. That's going to take more work. That's another reason why a lot of companies just take a national approach, because it's easier.
Right. And I think our last question that we'll have time for today, thank you to the participant who is from the Caribbean. And they asked if they need to be concerned about IAB regarding their company's website advertising. Gary, what are your thoughts?
I would say to the user in the Caribbean, I think you should invite Jody and I to speak at a conference, where you live, and we can explain it all in much greater detail there. Yeah. But look, privacy laws are international. You have to look at different locations, and most regulators take an extraterritorial approach to their privacy laws. It's not whether you are physically present in their state and your business is incorporated or has people there or has offices there. It's, are you processing the personal data of their residents? That's what they're looking at.
Wonderful. Well, Gary, we are so delighted that you were able to join us today. Thank you to everyone who participated in our webinar. As we said, the recording will be sent in the next couple days. Thank you so very much, and we wish you an amazing rest of the day.
Bye-bye.